Tonight we're discussing nationalism, an idea which seems to have come central to our discourse. Or is it about neo-nationalism? Is it about no longer being shy of saying India first? Is it about standing up for the national anthem in a cinema? Or is it about being anti-national if you oppose demonetization? Also from Kolkata, Amit Chaudhary, well-known author. Thank you all very much. Amit Chaudhary, when we talk about words and the interesting discourse we've had so far is the different meanings of nationalism. Is it different in the Indian context? I'm asking also about neo-nationalism. What we're seeing in 21st century, a kind of hybrid perhaps of what nationalism was originally meant to be or thought to be perhaps at the time of our freedom struggle, at the time of European freedom struggles happening with various rulers. What's the nationalism that we are seeing today in India around us? How would you describe it?
Well, I wouldn't describe it as nationalism. And I think, I mean, I myself am wary of nationalism, but I feel I'm becoming forced to be a nationalist in order to reappropriate this word, which I never had any interest in. But the kind of people who have appropriated this word and the violence with which they're using it makes me think that the word needs to be redefined and reappropriated, and that any act of opposition to this coercion and violence is a form of nationalism today. Because for me, as I said, in a piece I wrote last week for the Times of India, to some people it might almost seem that sitting down during the national anthem in a context of vigilantism and a vigilante kind of thuggery, where people are beaten up if they don't stand up, to some people it might seem that sitting down for the national anthem is an act of protest, and it's an act of protest to express solidarity with an idea of the nation which is important to us, which is a tolerant and free nation.
I think the most interesting thing is the different perspectives, and I think, Amit, anything you want to say?
Standing up for the national anthem is a ritual observance, okay? It's to do with a particular ritual associated to show and express respect for the nation, for the flag at that point of time. Strictly speaking, in the adult world of rational human beings, we might want to take part in this ritual, but not taking part in the ritual, or electing not to take part in the ritual, doesn't necessarily mean, or one shouldn't infer that it means a lack of respect or a lack of interest in the nation, which also, by the way, should be legitimate emotions or experiences for any national not to have an interest in the nation or to be indifferent to it. That is also a legitimate part of citizenry, and has been a part of this country's history, to be indifferent to the nation. Any number of literary texts show an indifference to the nation. They are not, the authors are not in jail because of that. Now, but I'm talking about people who are not indifferent to the nation, but have a deep sense of love and respect for the nation, but might not want to take part in a ritual observance. And not taking part in this ritual observance should not be construed as being disrespectful or unloving. And I've heard some bits of the earlier discussion where we've talked about the multifariousness, historic multifariousness of India. And one needs to add to that India's strong and powerful history of rejecting ritual observance. There is also a very, very strong history in the Bhakti tradition, but also going back to the Gita, with the Bhagavad Gita, which Sushma Swaraj reads every day. I've mentioned these passages in relation to Hinduism and how we view it, but I want to I want to read a couple of very short passages from the Gita about the Vedas in relation to how we are thinking of nationalism and ritual observance as a part of expressing nationalistic a love of the nation. So here's the first one. There is a reward that comes from the Vedas, says Krishna, or from sacrifice, from an austere life, or from holy gifts, but a far greater reward is attained by the yogi who knows the truth of light and darkness. He attains his everlasting home. This is the first one. And the second one, again Krishna speaking to Arjun, not by the Vedas or an austere life or gifts to the poor or ritual offerings can I be seen as thou hast seen me. Only by love can men see me and know me and come unto me. Both of these passages, the second one in a more powerful way than the first one, in a more explicit way, reject the idea that only by observing certain rituals and by reading the Vedas can we attain this knowledge of who Krishna is, okay, or who God is.
That's an interesting.
This is in the domain of religion.
No, that's an interesting answer. I think really
the same thing applies to the national anthem and to ritual observance in the domain of our everyday lives in the nation today.
Exactly, in cinema halls. That's an interesting
one line I would like to add.
Cocktail. Some would say a toxic cocktail. Some would say a realistic cocktail of politics, nationalism, religion, all in one. Amit Chaudhary, would you like to comment on that? That how, in some sense, politics in terms of governance has now become inextricably linked, and you see that in Kolkata as well, with the concept of nationalism, with the culture of, with the politics of religion. It's all become one kind of governing model in a sense, whether you're in West Bengal, whether you're in Uttar Pradesh, whether you're in the center of India, in the national capital, Delhi.
Yeah, certainly. I just want to make 3 points,
Sure.
If I may.
Yes, go ahead.
But of course, I mean, this whole business of conflating a party or a politician with the nation, you know, goes back a long way. And in post-independence India, India is Indira, Indira is India. I can't remember who said it. That I can remember his face, the person who used to say this. But you know, that was one of the first powerful articulations that, you know, if you disagree with Indira Gandhi, in a sense you're disagreeing with India, and that legacy has been, you know, been mutilated and blown out of all proportion now. What's happening now? But the 3 points besides the kind of the ideology of nationalism and the territoriality that Ashish Nandi mentions in relationship to the sentiment of patriotism, I also want to say that there is something that one can experience as a love of the nation, which doesn't have to do with ideology. Okay, one might say it's the love of your country or the love of the nation, but it's something that is mixed up with your memory. It's almost involuntary. You have no control over it, and it often directs counterintuitive moves, like such as in a time when it's seen to be the mark of, you know, wit and mark of intelligence and pragmatism to move to the West. I lived in the West for many years, and I made my way back to India and to Calcutta in 1999. And I did this not because I am a nationalist. I'm not in that sense a nationalist, or I have anything to do with patriotic sentiment, but because of some involuntary thing in me connected with memory and with my sense of the history of the place that made me want to come back. And even a kind of pride in the nation and its history, which made me see to it that I never gave up my Indian passport. In spite of all those years outside of India, we not want to aim towards, let's say, permanent domicile in the UK, all these conveniences that one aims towards unconsciously. And this has to do with a particular love of the nation, which is involuntary. Just as, you know, I mean, memories come up to you to do with people you love, which you are not controlling, but come out of, you know, your deep intimacy with them.
And no external forces controlling
it. This is the deep intimacy we have with this country, which we are not entirely in control of, and which directs some of our actions. This has nothing to do with standing up for the flag or the national anthem. That doesn't express this kind of love that I'm talking about at all. It, in fact, makes us focus on a completely different understanding of how these involuntary impulses of love with something or someone we're intimate with might inform our lives. And we are not talking about that because the discourse of nationalism is not a serious discourse. Its vocabulary is impoverished, and we cannot talk about it except in terms of us and them. So this brings me to the second point, the register of intimacy, of loving someone and having that sense of an intimate relationship with that thing, place or person, which also includes us being indifferent from time to time to that person, or even sharply critical of it. Questioning it fundamentally, that is a part of our intimate relationship with that thing. And it is right and it is proper for us as Indians to also have the right to question and criticize the nation. It is very, very important for us to feel this sense of intimacy and at-homeness where we are allowed to do this. And not to be allowed to do this is to rob this relationship with of a particular kind of intimacy and closeness. The third thing I wanted to say is the consequences of what we are looking at now. So the residues of various kind of amazing philosophies and streams of thought that have existed in this country for thousands of years are still with us. But then what we are doing today is also going to have consequences. If we look across the border at Pakistan and look at I'm not making a comparison because they have a very different set of problems. But the problems did not happen overnight. They happened over decades. And it's now that you see them in the kind of situation that they're in. The situation that they're in today has been happening, building up for decades. And they were in denial about it for decades. Now, we are in denial about the consequences of what is going to happen out of the ethos we are creating today. The ethos we are creating today, we will feel the consequences later. We'll feel the consequences a decade from now. Unless we behave more responsibly in the way we think and discriminate between various things to do with the nation and the national.
The point.
I want to talk very briefly about this whole business of Bharat Mata Ki Jai, if I may, or pride in the nation. To me, it seems pride in the nation was inculcated as a response to, as a necessary response to those who oppressed us, or who did not want to give us our nation or ourselves as part of that nation legitimacy or respect. So in the time of colonization, in times of the colonizer, this pride was extremely important, as it is still today. If you go somewhere where, in a sense, you are not on equal footing with others simply because you're Indian, and the pride can play out in various ways, which have nothing to do with violence, but just a belief in yourself and where you come from. And similarly, Bharat Mata Ki Jai, as far as I know, should be a kind of, or would have been a cry against the brutality of the oppressor. I mean, I see the right context, or the context I imagine for it would be a person crying out Bharat Mata Ki Jai 100 years ago as he's beaten up during a procession protesting on behalf of, wanting independence by a British policeman in this country. Bharat Mata Ki Jai. Now, the way this is being reused now, just as nationalism is being reused today, and the way it's being reused not as a kind of voice of courage and dignity against brutality, but to be brutal, to beat up. Bharat Mata Ki Jai is now reused as a form of aggression to beat up others, which is a very radical kind of recontextualization of a cry which was a cry against oppression, and is now being used in the interests of harassing and oppressing others. I mean, I find it an astonishing rewriting of where, what has happened to this slogan and where it has ended up right now.